Owen Mitchell sat alone at the corner table of Evergreen Steakhouse, watching the woman he'd been talking to disappear into the kitchen without explanation. 20 minutes of conversation, 20 minutes of connection he hadn't felt in 4 years, and she'd just walked away like he meant nothing. He pushed back his chair, ready to leave before the shame fully settled in, when the front door burst open. A woman stumbled through, soaked in snow, trembling and breathless. She locked eyes with him and said the 5 words that would change everything. "I'm so sorry I'm late. I'm your date." Owen had spent the entire drive to Evergreen Steakhouse trying to convince himself this wasn't a betrayal. His daughter Harper had wrapped her small arms around his neck that morning and whispered that Mommy would want him to be happy. She was 8 years old and shouldn't have to worry about her father's happiness. But here they were. 4 years after the accident that took Claire on Christmas Eve, and Owen still couldn't look at holiday lights without seeing the flashing red and blue of police cruisers reflected in snow. Travis had set this whole thing up. His business partner and closest friend had cornered him at the construction site 3 days ago, phone already in hand, showing him a profile picture of a woman named Autumn. "She's kind," Travis had said. "She's been through loss, too. Just one dinner, Owen." Owen had agreed mostly to stop the conversation, but also because some small part of him was tired of pretending he was fine when Harper asked why they never went to Christmas parties anymore. The restaurant smelled like pine and cinnamon when he walked in at 7 o'clock on the evening of December 20th, 5 days before Christmas. He'd worn the navy sweater Harper picked out, the one she said made his eyes look less sad. Travis had told him Autumn would be wearing a green sweater. Green sweater, dark hair, sweet smile. Owen spotted her almost immediately. A woman sat alone near the entrance, dark hair falling past her shoulders, wearing a forest green sweater. She was looking down at her phone, and something about the way she held herself made Owen think she might be nervous too. He cleared his throat softly when he reached her table. The woman looked up, and Owen saw warmth in her eyes that he hadn't expected. She smiled, genuine and reaching the corners of her eyes. Owen felt something shift in his chest, a small crack in the wall he'd built around himself. He introduced himself, stumbling over his words. She gestured to the empty chair, and Owen sat down. They started talking, and within minutes, the conversation flowed naturally. She asked about his work, and he found himself telling her about Mitchell & Sons construction. She listened like she actually cared, nodding, asking questions that showed she was paying attention. Owen asked about her family, and she told him about growing up in Denver, about loving the mountains in winter. She mentioned losing someone close to her, and the way she said it made Owen feel less alone. He talked about Claire without saying her name at first, testing the waters. The woman didn't flinch or offer empty condolences. She just nodded with soft understanding. 20 minutes passed. Owen lost track of time, which was something that hadn't happened in years. He told her about Harper, about how his daughter was the only reason he got out of bed some mornings. The woman smiled at that, said she understood what it meant to live for someone else. Owen felt a connection forming, fragile but real. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression changed. Something urgent flashed across her face, and she stood quickly. She apologized, said there was something she needed to handle, and walked toward the back of the restaurant. He watched her disappear through a door marked staff only. Owen sat there, staring at the empty chair. Maybe he'd misread everything. Maybe she wasn't interested, and this was her polite way of ending the conversation. He should have known better than to hope. He was reaching for his coat when a young waitress approached. She had a nervous smile and asked if he was waiting for Miss Reed. Owen froze. The waitress explained that Miss Reed had called the restaurant about 30 minutes ago. Her car had broken down on Interstate 70 because of the snowstorm. She'd asked if someone could let her date know she was running late. The words hit Owen like a physical blow. Miss Reed, Autumn Reed. The woman he'd spent the last 20 minutes pouring his heart out to was not his blind date. Owen felt heat crawl up his neck. He'd sat down at the wrong table. He'd told a complete stranger about his dead wife and his daughter, and she'd listened because she was polite or kind or too uncomfortable to correct him. Owen glanced toward the kitchen. She must have realized his mistake. The waitress asked if he wanted to wait for Miss Reed. She said it would probably be another 30 minutes, maybe longer depending on the roads. Owen wanted to leave, but something stopped him. Maybe it was Harper's voice in his head, telling him to try. Maybe it was exhaustion from carrying grief alone. Or maybe it was the memory of how it felt to talk to someone who seemed to understand. Owen told the waitress he would wait. She brought him water and bread. Owen sat alone, watching the door. The restaurant was decorated for Christmas. Garland wrapped around railings and tiny white lights strung across the ceiling. Soft holiday music played in the background. Owen just felt cold. 45 minutes passed. The storm outside had intensified. He could see snow swirling past the windows, thick and relentless. He thought about Harper safe at home with Travis's wife, probably watching Christmas movies. At least she was happy. The front door slammed open, and a gust of cold air swept through. Owen looked up and saw a figure stumbling inside, covered in snow. It was a woman, her hair plastered to her face, her coat soaked through. She was shaking, either from cold or exhaustion or both. When her eyes landed on Owen, she started walking toward him. She reached his table and stopped, breathing hard. Her cheeks were flushed red, and melted snow dripped from her coat. She apologized immediately, words tumbling out. Her car had died on the highway. Her phone battery had run out. She'd managed to get a ride from a stranger heading into the city, but they'd only been able to drop her off 2 miles away. She'd walked the rest of the distance through the storm because she'd promised to be here. Owen stared at her. This was Autumn Reed, his actual blind date, the woman who had just walked 2 miles through a blizzard to keep a promise to a man she'd never met. He stood up and told her it was okay. He asked if she was all right, if she needed to sit down. Autumn nodded, still apologizing, and sank into the chair across from him. The woman in the green sweater appeared then, carrying a thick blanket and a mug of hot cocoa. She draped the blanket around Autumn's shoulders and set the mug on the table. She looked at Owen with something knowing in her expression, something kind. She told him it looked like his real date had arrived, then wished him good luck before walking away. Owen realized then that she was Maya, the restaurant manager, and she'd known about his mistake all along but had been kind enough to let him talk anyway. They started talking, awkward at first. Autumn explained again about the car and the phone and the stranger. Owen told her about the mix-up, about sitting at the wrong table. Autumn laughed at that, a soft sound that seemed to surprise even her. She said she would have done the same thing. The conversation shifted. Autumn asked about his daughter, and Owen found himself talking about Harper with pride and protectiveness. Autumn smiled and told him about her younger sister, Lily, a high school senior who was too smart for her own good. Owen heard the weight in her voice when she talked about Lily, the same weight he carried when he talked about Harper. They were both living for someone else. Autumn mentioned her mother, briefly, just enough for Owen to understand that she'd lost her too. The grief in her eyes was familiar, and Owen felt that fragile connection start to form again. But this time, it was real. They stayed at the restaurant until 10 o'clock. The staff started cleaning up around them, but no one asked them to leave. Owen and Autumn exchanged phone numbers before they walked out into the cold. The snow had stopped, and the streets were quiet under a blanket of white. Owen offered to drive her home, and Autumn accepted. They didn't talk much in the car, but the silence felt comfortable. When he dropped her off at her apartment building, Autumn thanked him for waiting. Owen told her he was glad he did. She smiled, and for a moment, he thought about kissing her, but it was too soon, so he just said good night and watched her walk inside. He drove home thinking that maybe, just maybe, Harper was right. Maybe it was okay to try being happy again. Owen texted Autumn the next morning before he could talk himself out of it. The message was simple, asking if she and her sister wanted to come to his workshop that afternoon. Harper had been begging to make wooden ornaments for the tree. He hit send before he could overthink it. When Autumn replied yes immediately, Owen felt something close to excitement. He told Harper about the plan while she was eating breakfast, and she dropped her spoon into her cereal bowl, milk splashing onto the table. She asked if Autumn was the lady from the restaurant. Owen said yes, and Harper's face lit up. They arrived at 2 o'clock that afternoon, December 21st. Owen's workshop was attached to the house, a converted garage that smelled like sawdust and wood stain. Harper had already set up the workbench with scraps of pine and cedar, along with sandpaper and small jars of paint. Autumn stood on the porch with a girl who had to be Lily. The resemblance was there in the shape of their faces and the color of their hair, but where Autumn looked warm and open, Lily looked guarded. She had her arms crossed and her expression was carefully neutral. Autumn introduced them, and Lily offered a polite hello that didn't quite reach her eyes. Harper didn't notice or didn't care. She grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her toward the workshop, chattering about all the ornaments they were going to make. Lily let herself be dragged along, and Owen caught the smallest hint of a smile at the corner of her mouth. Autumn met his eyes with gratitude. The workshop became loud with Harper's voice and the sound of sandpaper scraping against wood. Owen showed them how to cut basic shapes, how to smooth the edges. Harper worked on a star, her tongue sticking out in concentration. Lily started with a simple circle, but within minutes she was asking questions about more complex designs. Owen handed her a template for a snowflake, and she bent over it with focus that reminded him of Autumn. Autumn worked beside Harper, helping her sand down the rough spots. She praised every small detail, and Harper glowed under the attention. Owen watched them together and felt something dangerous blooming in his chest. It looked too much like a family. At some point, Lily moved closer to Harper, showing her how to paint tiny details with a thin brush. The younger girl looked up at Lily adoringly, and Lily's expression softened. Autumn caught Owen's eye across the workbench and smiled, a smile that said she saw it too. They stayed until almost 6 o'clock. When it was time to leave, Harper hugged Autumn without asking permission first. She told her she smelled like cinnamon and asked if she could come back soon. Autumn promised she would, and Harper turned to Lily, suddenly shy, asking if they could be friends. Lily looked at her sister, then back at Harper, and said she'd like that. Owen drove them home because Autumn's car was still in the shop. When he pulled up in front of their apartment building, Autumn thanked him again. She told him she couldn't remember the last time Lily had smiled like that. Owen said he was glad. He watched them walk inside, already thinking about when he could see them again. The next day, December 22nd, Autumn invited them to her apartment to bake gingerbread cookies. Harper had been talking about it non-stop. Owen felt the same restless energy. He wanted to see Autumn again. Autumn's apartment was small, tucked into an older building on the east side of Denver. The furniture was mismatched but clean, and there were handmade decorations everywhere. Paper snowflakes hung from the ceiling, and a tiny artificial tree sat in the corner. It was the kind of place that felt like home despite its size. The kitchen was barely big enough for all of them, but they made it work. Autumn pulled out mixing bowls and measuring cups, and Harper immediately started cracking eggs with more enthusiasm than skill. Lily helped her clean up the mess, and Owen found himself standing next to Autumn, rolling out dough on the small counter. Their shoulders brushed, and neither of them moved away. Harper shaped her cookies into stars and Christmas trees, decorating them with so much icing that they were more frosting than gingerbread. Lily made hers with precision. Autumn worked beside Owen, cutting out shapes. She asked him about Claire, gently, and Owen found himself answering. He told her about the accident, about how it had happened on the way home from a Christmas party. He told her how he'd been working late that night, how he should have been in the car with her. Autumn didn't offer the usual platitudes. She just listened, and when he finished talking, she told him about her mother. She'd died 2 years ago from cancer, slowly and painfully, and Autumn had watched her fade away while trying to keep Lily from falling apart. She'd given up her own plans for college to take care of her sister. Owen understood. They stood there in the small kitchen, flour dusting their hands, and shared the weight of their grief with each other. Harper's laughter broke the moment, high and bright as she showed Lily a cookie shaped like a lopsided snowman. Later, when the cookies were cooling, Lily pulled Autumn aside. Owen pretended not to listen, but their voices carried. Lily told her sister that she could see what was happening, that Autumn liked this man and his daughter. She said she didn't want Autumn to give up anything else for her. Autumn's voice was soft when she replied, too soft for Owen to hear the words. But he saw the way Lily's expression tightened. There was something unsaid between them. Harper asked if they could stay for dinner. Owen looked at Autumn, who nodded. They ordered pizza and ate it on the floor of the tiny living room because the table wasn't big enough for 4. Harper sat next to Lily, telling her stories about school and friends. Lily listened with patience that came from practice. When they finally left, it was after 9 o'clock. Harper fell asleep in the car, and Owen carried her inside and tucked her into bed. She mumbled something about Autumn being nice. Owen kissed her forehead, then went downstairs and sat in the dark living room. He thought about Autumn's apartment, small and full of handmade things. He thought about the way she looked at Lily, like she'd do anything to protect her. And he thought about how dangerous it was to start hoping again. December 23rd arrived with fresh snow and clear skies. Owen texted Autumn and asked if she and Lily wanted to go to the winter festival downtown. Autumn said yes before he even finished typing, and they agreed to meet at 6 o'clock when the lights turned on. The festival was crowded with families and couples walking through rows of vendor booths and light displays. Harper held Owen's hand on one side and Lily's on the other, swinging between them. Owen felt the familiar pang of loss, but it was softer now, dulled by the warmth of Autumn walking beside him. They stopped in front of the enormous Christmas tree in the center of the square. It had to be 40 feet tall, covered in thousands of white lights and ornaments donated by local schools. Harper stared up at it with her mouth open, and Lily stood beside her, equally mesmerized. Harper turned to Autumn and asked if she was going to stay with them. The question came out of nowhere, innocent and direct. Autumn looked startled, and Owen felt his heart stop. Harper clarified, asking if Autumn was going to come back and visit them again, or if this was the last time. There was fear in her voice, the kind that came from losing someone before. Autumn knelt down so she was eye level with Harper. She told her she wasn't going anywhere. She promised she'd come back as many times as Harper wanted her to. Harper threw her arms around Autumn's neck, and Autumn held her tight. When she stood up, her eyes met Owen's, and there was something in her expression that looked like a promise. They walked through the rest of the festival, stopping to buy hot chocolate and roasted chestnuts. Lily and Harper ran ahead, pointing at lights and laughing. Owen and Autumn followed behind, their hands brushing but never quite holding. Owen thought about reaching for her hand a dozen times but couldn't make himself do it. When they got back to the car, Harper was yawning. Owen drove them back to Autumn's apartment, and this time, when he walked them to the door, Autumn touched his arm. She thanked him for the evening, for including them, for making Lily smile. Owen told her it was easy because she made Harper happy. They stood there in the cold hallway, close enough that Owen could see the snowflakes melting in Autumn's hair, and he almost kissed her. But Lily opened the door then, and the moment broke. Owen drove home thinking about promises and how easy they were to make and how hard they were to keep. He thought about Claire and the promises he'd made to her. He thought about Harper and the promise he made every day to keep her safe. And he thought about Autumn and the promise in her eyes. He wanted to believe in second chances. Christmas Eve morning arrived bright and cold. Owen woke up to Harper jumping on his bed, telling him it was Christmas Eve and they needed to make pancakes. He dragged himself downstairs and started breakfast, letting Harper crack the eggs and stir the batter. She talked non-stop about Autumn and Lily, about how maybe next year they could all celebrate Christmas as a family. Autumn called while they were eating. She asked if she could come over to make breakfast with them, said she had a recipe for cinnamon rolls her mother used to make. Owen said yes without thinking, and an hour later, she was standing in his kitchen, flour on her hands and a smile on her face. Harper attached herself to Autumn's side immediately. The kitchen smelled like sugar and cinnamon, and Harper was covered in dough by the time the rolls went into the oven. Autumn helped her wash her hands, laughing at the younger girl's running commentary. Owen stood back and watched them together, and he felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just hope anymore. It was something deeper, something that felt like the beginning of healing. They ate the cinnamon rolls at the kitchen table, warm and sticky and perfect. Harper declared them the best thing she'd ever tasted. Owen poured coffee for both of them, and they sat there in comfortable silence while Harper ran off to play. Autumn looked around the kitchen, taking in the family photos on the walls. She told Owen his home felt warm, felt lived in. Owen said it was because of Harper, that she kept him from disappearing into the grief. Autumn understood. She told him about the early days after her mother died, how Lily had barely spoken for weeks, but they'd survived, and now Lily was thriving in school, talking about college and the future. Autumn had sacrificed her own dreams to make that happen, but Owen could hear the exhaustion in her voice. They were still sitting at the table when Autumn's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and Owen saw her expression change. It went from relaxed to tense in the span of a heartbeat. She answered, and Owen could tell from her side of the conversation that it was important. She said yes and thank you several times, and when she hung up, her hands were shaking. Autumn looked at Owen, and there were tears in her eyes. She told him it was a job offer, a position she'd applied for months ago. Phoenix Financial Group wanted her as their senior accountant. The salary was $85,000 a year, more than twice what she made now. It was enough to pay for Lily's college, to give them security. But it meant moving to Arizona. It meant leaving Denver. Owen felt the words hit him like a physical blow. Phoenix, Arizona, 1,000 miles away. Autumn told him she had to take it, that this was the opportunity she'd been waiting for, but her voice cracked when she said it. He asked when she had to decide. Autumn said they wanted her to start on January 2nd. She'd need to move quickly to find an apartment and get settled before her first day. Owen did the math in his head. That gave her just over a week. He wanted to tell her not to go. He wanted to ask her to stay, but he couldn't. He'd just signed a contract with the Denver City Council for a 6-month construction project. If he backed out, his company would be ruined. And Harper was settled in school, had friends, had a life here. They sat in silence, the cinnamon rolls growing cold on the table between them. Harper's laughter drifted in from the other room, bright and oblivious. Owen reached across the table and took Autumn's hand. He told her he understood, that she had to do what was right for Lily. Autumn squeezed his hand and told him she was sorry. Owen said he was sorry too. They were saying goodbye before they'd even had a chance to begin. Autumn left that afternoon, telling Harper she needed to go home and start packing. Harper asked when she'd see her again, and Autumn promised it would be soon, but Owen heard the lie in her voice. He walked her to the door, and they stood there looking at each other. Autumn touched his face, her hand warm against his cheek, and told him she wished things were different. Owen said he did too. Then she turned and walked away, and Owen closed the door and leaned against it, trying to remember how to breathe. Harper came running, asking where Autumn went. Owen told her she had to go home. Harper asked if she was coming back tomorrow for Christmas. Owen said he didn't think so. Harper's face fell, and she asked why. Owen knelt down and pulled her into a hug. He told her Autumn had to move away for work, that it was a good opportunity. Harper asked if they'd ever see her again. Owen said he didn't know, and the truth of that answer broke something inside him. That night, Harper cried herself to sleep. Owen sat in her room, stroking her hair and telling her it would be okay, even though he didn't believe it himself. When she finally fell asleep, he went downstairs and sat in the dark living room, staring at the Christmas tree. The wooden ornaments from his workshop hung on the branches, the ones Harper had made with Autumn and Lily. Owen reached out and touched the star Harper had painted, and he thought about how quickly hope could turn into loss. Autumn and Lily left Denver on December 26th, planning to reach Phoenix and settle in before her January 2nd start date. Owen didn't go to see them off. He couldn't watch them drive away. Harper asked about them every day, wanting to know when Autumn was coming back. Owen answered as honestly as he could without breaking her heart more than it already was. Christmas had been quiet and sad. Harper had opened her presents with half her usual enthusiasm. They'd eaten leftover cinnamon rolls for breakfast, and Owen had burned his hand on the oven because he wasn't paying attention. Everything felt wrong without Autumn there. December 28th arrived with a weather warning. The news stations had been talking about it for days. A massive winter storm moving down from Canada that was supposed to be the worst in a decade. Schools closed early, and businesses sent workers home. Owen made sure Harper had everything she needed before the snow started. Travis called to check on them. Owen said they'd be fine. The storm hit around noon. Snow fell so thick that Owen couldn't see across the street. The wind howled against the windows, and the temperature dropped to dangerous levels. Owen kept checking his phone for updates, watching the weather alerts pile up. The roads were closed, the highways impassable. Harper's school had sent out a message saying the buses were running behind schedule because of the weather. Owen wasn't worried at first, but when 2 hours passed and Harper still wasn't home, he started to feel the familiar flutter of panic in his chest. He called the school, and they told him the buses were stuck on Interstate 70, just past the mountain pass. They were safe. The woman on the phone assured him, but they couldn't move until the plows came through. Interstate 70, the same stretch of highway where Claire had died. Owen felt the room tilt, and he grabbed the counter to steady himself. He hung up and ran to his truck. He had to get to Harper. The roads were barely visible under the snow. Owen's truck slid twice before he made it to the highway entrance, and when he got there, a police officer flagged him down. The cop told him the interstate was closed, that nobody was getting through until the storm passed. Owen tried to explain about Harper, about the school bus. The officer was sympathetic but firm. He said emergency crews were working on it, that the kids would be fine, that Owen needed to go home and wait. Owen sat in his truck on the side of the road, watching snow pile up on his windshield. He couldn't go forward, and he couldn't go back. He was stuck, just like 4 years ago when he'd gotten the call about Claire. His hands were shaking when he pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts. His thumb hovered over Autumn's name. He typed the message without thinking. Harper was stuck on Interstate 70, the same place Claire had been. He couldn't get to her, and he needed help. He knew Autumn was far away, knew she couldn't do anything, but he sent the message anyway because he didn't know what else to do. Owen sat there for 15 minutes before his phone buzzed. Autumn's response was 3 words. She said she was coming. Owen stared at the screen, not understanding, but his phone rang then, and it was Autumn's voice on the other end, tight with determination and fear. She told him she'd never actually made it to Phoenix. She and Lily had only gotten as far as Colorado Springs before Lily got sick with a bad flu. They'd checked into a hotel to wait it out, planning to finish the drive once Lily felt better. But now Autumn was getting in the car, and she was heading north. Owen tried to tell her not to come, that the roads were too dangerous. Autumn cut him off. She told him Harper needed her, and that was all that mattered. Owen heard the tremor of fear underneath the determination. He wanted to tell her to stay safe, to turn around, but he couldn't make the words come out because he needed her to come. Autumn hung up, and Owen sat in his truck, praying. He prayed that Autumn would make it safely, that Harper would be okay, that he wouldn't lose anyone else. The cop knocked on his window and told him he needed to move. Owen drove home in a daze. Travis showed up an hour later, letting himself in with the spare key. He found Owen sitting on the couch in the dark, staring at his phone and waiting for news. Travis sat down beside him and didn't say anything for a long time. When he finally spoke, he told Owen that Harper would be fine, that kids were resilient. Owen wanted to believe him. Owen's phone rang at 6 o'clock. It was a number he didn't recognize. A woman's voice told him the children were safe. The buses had been cleared, and they were bringing the kids to a warming station at a fire department near the highway. Parents could pick them up there. Owen was in his truck before the woman finished talking, with Travis shouting after him to be careful. The fire station was crowded with parents and crying children when Owen arrived. He pushed through the crowd, searching for Harper's face. He found her sitting on a bench near the back, wrapped in an emergency blanket and holding a cup of hot chocolate. She looked small and scared, but she was alive. Owen ran to her, dropping to his knees and pulling her into his arms. He held her so tight she complained that he was squishing her, but he couldn't let go. Harper pulled back and looked at him with wide eyes. She told him Autumn had come. Owen's heart stopped. Harper said a woman had shown up at the bus before the fire trucks did, that she'd climbed through the snow and helped get the doors open. She'd made sure all the kids were okay and had stayed with them until help arrived. Harper said the woman had known her name, had asked if she was Owen Mitchell's daughter. When Harper said yes, the woman had hugged her and told her everything would be all right. Owen looked around the fire station, searching the crowd for Autumn's face. A firefighter noticed him looking and asked if he was searching for someone. Owen described Autumn, and the firefighter nodded. He said she'd left about 20 minutes ago, that she'd refused medical attention even though she looked exhausted. She'd told them she needed to get back to her sister, who was sick and waiting at a hotel in Colorado Springs. Travis insisted on taking Harper home. He told Owen to go find Autumn, that he'd make sure Harper got home safe. Owen drove south through the clearing storm. Autumn had come. She'd driven through the worst blizzard in a decade, faced down her biggest fear, and saved his daughter. And he'd let her walk away without even saying thank you. The hotel was a small chain off the highway. Owen found Autumn's room number from the front desk clerk. He knocked on the door, and Lily answered. She looked tired and pale, remnants of the flu still visible in her face. She recognized Owen immediately and stepped aside to let him in. Autumn was sitting on the edge of one of the twin beds, staring at her hands. She looked up when Owen entered, and the exhaustion in her eyes made his chest ache. He asked if she was okay, and she nodded, but her hands were still shaking. Owen sat down beside her and took those shaking hands in his own. He told her thank you, told her she'd saved Harper's life. Autumn shook her head and said she'd had to come, that she couldn't have lived with herself if something had happened. Lily cleared her throat from across the room. She told Owen there was something he needed to know. Owen looked at her, and Lily pulled an envelope from her backpack. She handed it to Autumn, whose hands started shaking harder. Lily explained that she'd gotten a scholarship, a full ride to the University of Colorado Boulder. The letter had come 2 weeks ago, but she'd hidden it because she knew Autumn would turn down the Phoenix job if she found out. Lily had thought she was helping, but watching Autumn cry on Christmas Day had made her realize she'd been wrong. Autumn stared at the letter, tears running down her face. She asked Lily why she hadn't said anything sooner, and Lily's voice broke when she answered. She said she was tired of Autumn sacrificing everything for her, tired of being the reason her sister couldn't be happy. She told Autumn she deserved to have a life, too, to fall in love, to build something for herself. The scholarship meant they could stay in Denver. It meant Autumn didn't have to take the Phoenix job if she didn't want to. Owen felt hope bloom in his chest. He asked Autumn what she wanted to do, and she looked at him with those tear-filled eyes. She said she wanted to stay, but she couldn't use the scholarship as an excuse to give up a good job. She still needed to support them both, still needed to make sure Lily had everything she needed beyond just tuition. Owen told her about an idea he'd had. His company was growing and needed someone to manage the finances properly. Travis had been handling the books, but he was terrible at it. They'd been talking about hiring a real accountant for months. Owen explained that it would be a legitimate position, senior financial manager for Mitchell & Sons Construction. The salary would be comparable to what Phoenix had offered, maybe slightly less but with room for growth. There would be benefits, health insurance, retirement contributions. It wasn't charity. It was a real job that his company genuinely needed. Autumn looked at him for a long time, searching his face for something. She asked if he was sure, if this was really what he wanted. Owen told her he'd never been more sure of anything in his life. He said he wanted her to stay, wanted Harper to have her in her life, wanted to see where this thing between them could go if they gave it a real chance. He told her he was terrified of losing someone again, but he was more terrified of never trying. Autumn's answer was to kiss him. It was soft and tentative, her lips cold from the storm and tasting like salt from her tears. Owen kissed her back, his hands coming up to cup her face, and for the first time since Claire died, he felt like he was allowed to be happy. Lily made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob, and when they pulled apart, she was smiling through her own tears. They drove back to Denver together the next morning, December 29th. The storm had passed, leaving the city covered in fresh snow that sparkled in the sunlight. Harper was waiting at home with Travis, and when she saw Autumn walk through the door, she screamed and ran into her arms. Autumn held her tight, promising again that she wasn't going anywhere. Harper asked if that meant Lily was staying too, and when Lily confirmed it, Harper grabbed her hand and dragged her off to show her something in her room. Owen and Autumn stood in the entryway, watching the girls disappear upstairs. Travis clapped Owen on the shoulder before letting himself out. Autumn leaned into Owen's side, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. She asked him if he was ready for this, for the complications and the work it would take to blend their families together. Owen said he was. He'd been running from happiness for 4 years, and he was tired of running. It was time to stop being afraid and start living again. 1 year later, Owen found himself back at Evergreen Steakhouse on Christmas Eve. He'd reserved the same corner table where he'd sat waiting for his blind date, the table where everything had started. Autumn sat across from him now, wearing a green sweater that reminded him of that first night. Harper and Lily were at the next table over, trying and failing to contain their giggles. Maya, the restaurant manager who'd unknowingly started it all that night by being kind to a confused stranger, stood behind the bar with a knowing smile. Owen reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. His hands were steadier than he'd expected them to be, and when he opened the box to reveal the ring inside, Autumn's breath caught. He told her he'd been thinking about this for months, about what it meant to build a life with someone after loss. He said he'd learned that loving someone again didn't mean forgetting the people who came before. It meant honoring their memory by choosing to be happy, by choosing to live fully instead of just surviving. He asked her to marry him, to be his partner and Harper's stepmother and the person he built a future with. Autumn said yes before he finished asking. She was crying again, but this time it was the good kind of tears. Owen slipped the ring onto her finger, and Harper and Lily erupted in cheers from their table. Other diners started clapping, and Maya brought over a bottle of champagne on the house. Owen pulled Autumn close and kissed her while their daughters laughed, and the restaurant full of strangers celebrated with them. Later that night, after they'd driven home and tucked Harper into bed, Owen and Autumn stood in front of the Christmas tree. The wooden ornaments Harper had made still hung on the branches, joined now by new ones from the past year. Autumn leaned her head on Owen's shoulder and told him she was glad she'd walked 2 miles through a snowstorm to meet him. Owen said he was glad he'd waited. They stood there in the soft glow of the Christmas lights. 2 people who'd learned that sometimes the best gifts come wrapped in second chances, and sometimes the person you're meant to find is the one who refuses to give up on you, even when everything tells them they should.